The first thing Warrant Officer Dara Osi noticed about the new crew member was her hands. They were wrong, not dramatically wrong. Not claws where fingers should be wrong. Just a half-second's worth of wrong. The way her left thumb curled inward when she picked up her coffee mug, a gesture that belonged to nobody Dara had ever watched do it. People who drink coffee develop small personal rituals. The curl of the thumb, the angle of the wrist, the exact moment the eyes go distant before the first sip. Petty Officer Yeva Marchetti had been drinking coffee on the Corvus Station crew deck for 11 months. But the woman who sat across from Dara now picked up the mug like someone who had been briefed on the concept of coffee but had never truly wanted any. Dara said nothing. She filed it away in the back of her mind with the other small wrongnesses. The way Marchetti no longer reached for the hot sauce at dinner. The way she had stopped humming. The old Marchetti hummed old Earth songs, compulsively half-aware tunes from her grandmother's village in western Ukraine. Songs about wheat fields and rivers, and men who didn't come home. The new Marchetti was silent, not quieter silent, like something wearing silence as a coat. Davra filed it all away and said nothing, because the war had been going for 6 years, and she had learned that you gathered your information slowly, carefully, before you moved. Moving too fast got people killed. She had learned that the hard way, outside of Tau Ceti Aviv, when she had moved too fast on a distress signal and her squad leader had caught a plasma bolt through the chest. So she watched. She catalogued. She waited. The Veth had been teaching humanity to wait for 6 years. They came from somewhere beyond the Kepler band. That was all anyone knew for certain. The rest was inference and autopsy and the occasional desperate interrogation of wreckage. Their ships were organic, asymmetric, grown rather than built. Their weapons were elegant and merciless. Their strategy was patient in a way that made human generals feel like children playing checkers against something that thought in 4 dimensions. They did not fight the way humanity expected enemies to fight. They did not storm installations or bombard cities. They replaced. That was the word the intelligence briefings used. Replaced. Clean, clinical, almost bloodless, a word that kept the horror at exactly the right distance for the brass to keep making decisions. What it meant in practice was this. A Veth infiltration unit could produce an exact biological duplicate of a human being. The duplicate carried all the surf's information, appearance, voice, fingerprints, the specific weight of a body in a corridor at 3 in the morning. What it did not carry, could not carry, was the accumulated weight of lived experience, the small rituals, the old songs, the way a thumb curved around a mug. The Veth had been replacing human crew members aboard deep space installations for 8 months. Nobody had caught one yet. Nobody except Dara Osi, who had been watching Yeva Marchetti's hands for 2 weeks and had still not moved. She was waiting for the right lever. She found it by accident, the way most good intelligence finds you, through someone else's carelessness. The station's secondary research bay had been sealed for 3 months after a pressure leak. When maintenance finally cracked it open, they found something that nobody had put there. A compact transit node, approximately the size of a field kit, constructed from materials that were emphatically not human. It was dull gray and slightly warm to the touch, and it hummed at a frequency that sat just below conscious awareness, in the range that made your molars ache. It was, according to the xenotech specialist they scrambled from Deck 7, a portal anchor, a fixed point for dimensional transit, the Veth equivalent of a door. The impossible deadline came from Admiral Reyes via encrypted burst transmission at 300 hours. They had 72 hours to understand the device before a Veth warship, already detected at the edge of the system's Oort cloud, already decelerating, arrived to either recover it or destroy it. 72 hours to reverse engineer 6 years of alien physics. 72 hours before the device either saved them or the war took another station. Dara read the transmission 3 times. Then she went to find Chief Engineer Tapas Ibarra, because Tapas was the only person on the station who was still genuinely unafraid of the Veth, and she needed someone who would think instead of panic. She found him in the machine shop, rebuilding a coolant relay by hand because the fabricator was down again. He listened to her without putting down his tools. 72 hours, he said. 72 hours. He turned the relay over in his hands. He had the specific focus calm of a man who had survived 3 station sieges by doing the next task and then the next task, and refusing to look at the entire shape of the problem. And you think Marchetti is a Veth infiltrator? I think the woman drinking coffee on deck 3 is not Yeva Marchetti. Okay, he set the relay down. So we have a door, we have an infiltrator, and we have 72 hours. That's the situation. He almost smiled. Disruption causes opportunity. Somebody smarter than me said that once. I don't think they meant this particular kind of disruption. Nobody ever does. He picked up a diagnostic tool. Show me the device. They worked through the night. The Veth transit node operated on a principle that the xenotech specialist, a young lieutenant named Femi Bale, who had the exhausted intensity of someone living on stimulants and theoretical physics, called dimensional bleed. 2 points in space, separated by any distance, could be connected through a membrane that the Veth had learned to puncture and hold open. The membrane required enormous energy to maintain. But here was the thing Femi kept coming back to, kept writing on the whiteboard in Deck 7's lab and underlining. On the far side of the membrane, time moved slower, not dramatically slower, approximately 12-1. Every minute you spent through the door cost 5 seconds in real space. Tomas stared at the board. He was quiet for a long time in the way he got quiet when something was assembling itself in his mind, components clicking into alignment. We can't stop that warship, he said finally. Not with what we have, no. But we have 72 hours, which is, he did the math in his head, which is about 14 minutes on their side, if the ratio holds. 14 minutes before the warship gets here. Femi looked up from his notes. You're thinking about going through. I'm thinking about what you could do in 14 minutes on their side, Tomas said, if you knew exactly what you were looking at for. Dara felt the shape of it before she could articulate it. The Veth warship was coming to recover or destroy the node, which meant the node was valuable, which meant it was connected to something, a command structure, a transit network, the specific architecture of how they moved infiltrators through the membrane. If you went through to the Veth side with enough information, 14 minutes was enough to find a target, and if you destroyed what you found on the other side, you didn't just destroy a ship, you destroyed the network that ship was part of. You didn't just hold the door, you went through it and you broke what was on the other side. There's a warning in the log, Femi said quietly. He was holding a folder of translated documents, fragments recovered from the node's memory core, the painstaking work of 3 months of xenolinguistic analysis. The previous occupant of this station bay. There was a researcher here before the pressure breach. She left records. He put the folder on the table. Her name, rendered in the xenolinguistics team's best approximation, had been something close to Marissa. She had been a xenotech researcher who had discovered an earlier Veth node 3 years ago, before anyone understood what they were. She had gone through alone, without backup, without telling anyone, drawn by grief or curiosity or desperation, it was impossible to say which. Her notes filled 14 data chips in dense, increasingly fragmented entries. She had found something on the other side. She had kept going back. She had stopped writing about the physics and started writing about the voices, the shapes in the bleed light, the versions of herself she was beginning to see, reflections in the membrane that answered when she spoke. She had lost herself to the architecture of it. The last entry was dated 9 months ago. There was no body, there was no evidence of violence. She had simply gone through and not come back. Dara read the last entry twice. She noted the specific texture of the grief in it, the kind of grief that bends toward obsession when it isn't given anything useful to do. She recognized it. She had felt versions of it after Tau Cetia 4th. She noted it and set it aside, because right now the grief had to wait. She went alone, Dara said. Yes, we don't go alone. Tomas nodded. He was already looking at the node. The infiltrator was the key. Dara had known it since the moment she filed away the wrongness of Marchetti's hands. A Veth infiltrator was a door of a different kind, a living link to the network on the other side. If the thing wearing Marchetti's face had been receiving instructions through the node, if it had been using the sealed bay for transit, then it had a map inside it. Not a map it could give willingly, but a map that could be traced. Femi built the trace device in 4 hours, working from the theory that the transit membrane left a specific resonance signature in biological tissue. The infiltrator would carry that signature the way a diver carries nitrogen, dissolved, invisible, but measurable if you knew what instrument to use. Dara walked onto Deck 3 at 0600 hours with the device in her jacket pocket and sat down across from the woman who was not Yeva Marchetti. She said. The infiltrator looked at her with Yeva's eyes. Morning. Dara set her coffee mug on the table. She noted the inward curl of the left thumb, present exactly as before, because the Veth were thorough in their programming of surface behaviors. She noted the absence of humming. She reached into her jacket. I need to ask you something, she said. It's about the pressure breach on Deck 9. A microsecond's delay, not long enough for a human to catch. Long enough if you were watching. She pressed the device against the table's edge, and it read the resonance in the air between them, and it confirmed what she already knew. She looked at the thing wearing Marchetti's face, and she said, not unkindly, I know what you are. It was quiet for a moment, and then it said, in Yeva Marchetti's voice, is she real? The one you're looking for? Yes, they all ask that. It picked up the coffee mug and looked at it. Whether their versions are real. We are told they are not. Who tells you that? It looked at her. The eyes were perfect replicas. Whoever the Veth had made to look through them had done extraordinary work. The same ones who are coming to recover this station, not just the node. No, not just the node. Dara was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the word real, and about Noel, and about the specific moral convenience of deciding that people on the other side of a threshold didn't count. It was the oldest trick in the history of violence. First you made them abstract, and then the abstraction excused anything. The Veth had built an entire war strategy on that logic. Replace the humans, they're not real on our side, just variables in an equation. She had heard human generals use the same language about alien losses. She noted that too. She noted it and filed it, because the war was more complicated than either side wanted to admit, and because the specific thing that made humanity worth fighting for was the uncomfortable stubbornness with which individual humans kept insisting on complication when everyone else wanted simplicity. I need the transit frequency, she said, the exact resonance signature for the main node on your side. If I give you that, it said, they'll know. They're already coming. It was quiet for a very long time. Long enough that Dara began to calculate what came next if it refused. Then it said, in a voice that wasn't quite Yeva Marchetti's anymore, something under the surface, something tired and old. The third harmonic, the device your engineer built. Set it to the third harmonic and it will open a path to the command hub. Why? It put the mug down. Because she was real, the one I replaced. It said this carefully, like a confession. I know that now. They don't tell us, but I know. Dara looked at it for a moment. Then she stood up. I'm going to have to confine you. You understand that? Yes. When this is done, if there's a when, we'll figure out what comes next. It nodded with Yeva Marchetti's head. She hummed songs, it said quietly. Old ones. I learned them. I don't know why. Something about rivers. Dara walked back to Deck 7. They went through at hour 61 of 72, with 11 hours left before the warship arrived. 3 of them, Dara, Tomas, and Femi, who had refused to stay behind on the grounds that someone had to recalibrate the transit node on their side if everything went sideways. The membrane opened with a sound like a held breath releasing. The light through it was cold and the color of deep water. Dara went first, because she was the one who had decided this was possible, and it seemed important to go first. The far side was vast. That was the first thing. The sheer scale of it. A chamber that shouldn't have existed inside the compact mass of the node's anchor, a space the size of a hangar bay constructed from materials that were simultaneously familiar and wrong in the way that dreams are wrong. The walls were curved inward like the inside of a shell. The light came from no visible source. The floor was warm. The Veth command hub looked nothing like anything human engineers would have built, and everything like what they would have built if they had started from completely different first principles. There were no sharp angles. There was no separation between structure and function. The walls were the circuitry. The ceiling was the processor. The whole space breathed with a low harmonic that Dara felt in her sternum. On the far side, they had 14 minutes. Femi found the transit relay in 3. It was not hidden. The Veth, apparently, had not imagined that a human would stand inside their command hub looking for it. The arrogance of that struck Dara as very familiar. It was the arrogance of any power that had been winning for too long. You stopped imagining the countermove. You stopped accounting for the specific human habit of doing the irrational, the stubborn, the inadvisable thing when the advisable options were gone. Tomas pulled the relay housing in the next 4 minutes. He worked with the precise economy of a man who had been fixing machines in deep space for 20 years, who had learned that every tool is equally useful if you understand what it's doing. The relay was not like any human component he had worked with. It was also, he noted with professional appreciation, not unlike certain biological systems, redundant, distributed, designed to root around damage. He did not root around it. He went straight through the center. 3 minutes, Dara said. The explosion she planted would have destroyed a human component bank in approximately 1/8 the time it took to destroy the Veth relay. Alien materials burned differently, hotter, stranger, with a specific violet light that she noted and filed for the debrief she was already planning. The charge she had brought was designed by Tomas for exactly this purpose, working from 6 years of accumulated intelligence about Veth materials science and his own educated guesses about the rest. It was not perfect, it was thorough. They went back through the membrane with 40 seconds to spare in their time, 2 minutes and change in station time. The warship arrived exactly on schedule. It arrived into a system where its command hub's transit relay was destroyed, its infiltrator network in the sector was cut off at the root, and 3 humans were standing at the entrance to a captured Veth transit node with a complete record of everything they had found on the other side. The warship held position for 4 hours, which was long enough for Admiral Reyes to scramble 2 cruisers and long enough for the intelligence packet to be transmitted to Fleet Command via burst encryption. Then the warship left. It simply left, reversed its deceleration, turned its vast organic body against the dark, and moved away through the Oort cloud until it was gone. Dara watched it go on the station's long-range array and felt something complicated. Not triumph, exactly, not relief. Something closer to the specific exhaustion that comes after you have held a position longer than seemed survivable. And the position has held, and now you have to figure out what comes next. She went to the holding room where they had confined the infiltrator. It was sitting on a cot with its hands in its lap. When she came in, it looked up with Yeva Marchetti's eyes. "Did it work?" it asked. The warship left. It nodded. Something moved across its face that she could not categorize. Not relief, not satisfaction. Something more complex. She sang one about rivers, it said. The original, in Ukrainian. I don't know the words, only the melody. "We'll find her," Dara said. "The Veth took her somewhere. We'll find the record." "You don't know that." "No, but we'll try anyway." It looked at her. Why? She thought about the researcher whose name was something like Marissa, who had gone through a door alone because grief had made the irrational feel like the only option, and who had lost herself to the architecture of something she didn't fully understand. She thought about Tomas working with alien tools by feel and instinct. She thought about Femi explaining the physics of dimensional bleed with the same excitement he might have used for any interesting problem, as if the fact that the problem was also a war wasn't going to stop him from finding it interesting. "Because she's real," Dara said. "They all are." She left the door open when she walked out because she hadn't decided yet what to do about that particular problem. And she had learned, expensively, over 6 years of a war that had no good moves left in it, that leaving a door open was not the same as deciding to go through it. Sometimes it just meant you were thinking. Sometimes it meant you believed that thinking was still worth doing. The debrief took 11 hours. Fleet Command sent 4 analysts who asked the same questions in different orders and wrote down the answers with expressions that suggested they were trying to hold something vast and unmanageable inside their understanding of it. Femi explained the physics twice and then drew diagrams. Thomas showed them the transit node and answered questions about the relay housing until the analysts ran out of questions and started looking at each other. Dara watched them and thought about the thing the infiltrator had said. They are told they are not real. Someone had decided that. A specific someone, or a council, or an ideology, the specific mechanism didn't matter. What mattered was that a decision had been made that the value of a life depended on which side of a threshold it stood on. The Veth had built their entire replacement strategy on that decision. And the strategy had worked for 6 years, right up until it encountered the specific human stubbornness of a warrant officer who filed away the wrongness of a thumb curl and waited for the right lever. She didn't think the war was over. She knew wars well enough to know that one good move didn't end them, that the shape of a long war bends by increments and each increment costs something. But she thought they had taken something real from the Veth today. Not just the relay, not just the intelligence packet, but the specific fiction that humans couldn't be unexpected, that they would stay on their side of the door, that they would keep treating the architecture of the enemy as something to be observed rather than entered and dismantled from inside. The analyst asked if she had anything to add. She thought about the melody, Ukrainian, old, something about rivers. Yes, she said, we need to look for the missing researcher. She went through a node 3 years ago and didn't come back. If the Veth can replace people going out, it's possible they can hold people coming in. I want to know where they're kept. The analysts looked at each other again. That's a significant operational undertaking, one of them said. Yes, Dara agreed. You're suggesting a full search operation based on the fact that she's real, Dara said. Same as everybody. She said it the way you say something that you have decided is true, regardless of how convenient it is, the way you say things when you are tired and done with the efficient logic of acceptable losses, and the clean language that keeps horror at the right distance for decision-making. She said it the way her squad leader, dying outside Tau Ceti 4, had said her name, specific present, resistant to abstraction. The analyst wrote it down. On Deck 3, at some point in the next hour, the thing that had replaced Yeva Marchetti began to hum quietly to itself, a melody without words. Something about rivers and men who went away. It hummed it the way something hums a song it learned from watching someone who needed it, imperfect, searching for the right intervals, by feel, not quite right but closer than silence. Nobody heard it, but it was there. The station kept moving through the dark, carrying its cargo of complicated, stubborn, real things forward into whatever came next.